All right, I'm excited to have our next guest here. One of the first people I met when I came on to Leaders of Color, Mrs. or Dr. Soribel Genao. Um, Soribel, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm sorry, Soribel Genao, Leaders of Color, class of 2021 in New York. Soribel, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what drew you to Leaders of Color program.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I am Soribel Genao, LLC NY 2021, as Terrell just said. I born and raised in New York City through and through, product of New York City public schools. I went to as a commuter student, St. John's University for my undergrad. I intended to go to NYU for a semester until for grad school until I realized that it was not a fit. And it wasn't just a feeling or a thought or whether I was doing in academic, but my professors at the time realized that because the other students weren't speaking after I would engage the conversations, they sat me down and said, maybe you should look into other programs in New York City. Now, I could have taken offense to that and said, how dare you say that I don't belong here? But I knew what it was. And I was so happy that one of them had recommended I look into the urban planning and affairs program at Hunter College, which I'm still crazy over. It was one of the best experiences I had. Which is also the reason why I ended up getting a doctorate. 2 months before graduation, my mentor professor there, Lakshmi Ramasubramanian, had very intentionally, as soon as I said, well, I can't wait to graduate so I can get back into the workforce, said, no, it's great that you have those aspirations, but I see so much more in you. You should go get your doctorate. I had no desire to be back in school, but as an obedient student, I applied to 6 schools, 2 of which I got funding for and from, and which led me to Rutgers University, Newark. It was there that I majored and was very interested in public administration with a focus in education policy. I knew that as a product of New York City public schools and the challenges I had in undergrad, not so much because of my writing, but really being prepared into a system that was not set up for people that looked like me. It wasn't until I got to undergrad that I realized how different I was. Again, I used to take the train to school, and in every single class, if I wasn't the only Black student, I was maybe one of two, max three. And we would always congregate together and rely on one another, trade notes because it wasn't a welcoming place. However, we did what we had to do, and we were very, very naive at the very beginning, but somehow found a way to truly rely on the support of one another, other faculty, other programs. Big up HEOP because it is one of the most, I mean, New York City University of New York, it's called SEEK, but it is one of those wraparound supportive services that students of color tend to have if they do come from low income families. Um, and since graduating Rutgers University in May of 2010, 2 months later, I got a position at Queens College as an assistant professor of education leadership, which I absolutely love, still am very passionate about. Nothing fills me up more than seeing teachers who are really trying to make the most of leadership, whether it's in the school or in the district, through radical care and love, and knowing that while many of our teachers do not look or culturally represent our student population, are very intentional about how they want to go about it. I won't say all of them, because we do have some who are just there to get a master's through other programs. But those that are looking to become leaders are like I said, intentional about how they go about it and are part of my program and other programs throughout New York State. To understand, yes, the theory and the research part of it, but how do we turn that into practice? So to see and be a part of that evolution has been much more than rewarding for me.
Awesome. Now, when you were in the Leaders of Color program, of course, we do a lot of teaching and training. But, one thing that we try to work hard to do, or that Leaders of Color works hard to do, is create that strong environment for building a network. Can you, or do you have any reflections about that part of the program when you were in it?
Absolutely. I think that, it was initially, I know that we were, if I'm not mistaken, the second cohort. So we didn't have yet a reputation, or my cohort hadn't really been in touch with the alum yet. So in not knowing what the program was about, it felt really good to go into this with no pretentiousness or predetermined ideas. And I mean, our workshops and trainings went from what the optics of any person can look or seem like, all the way to legislation and policies. And really, truly, how one presents themselves when they show up isn't always who they are. But I think it was the conversation of truly understanding the diverse perspectives of, because even the idea of coming to any position with a student tie is such a white supremacist issue that we deal with and struggle with. And, I recently had a conversation with my friends from Great Britain. And, of course, the banter back and forth about, how does ongoing education and professional development help you and continue to insist on pushing folks forward after they've gotten all their credentials. And I brought up our experiences in training at LLC, and I said, if we're not careful, we will continue following the Eurocentric ideologies that you posited on us, right? And personally, I don't think there's anything great about Britain, but it also goes into how much of that is still a very big comfort zone for us to really rely on, to just say, well, this is how it's always been done. The enabling ideas of, well, this is how you have to dress to impress. And then you have the arts, right? The creatives of this world that don't necessarily have to walk into a room, or those folks who have been either fortunate enough to come from a wealth of not just finances, but other types of resources, where they don't have to walk in so that they are or intentionally dressing to impress anybody. So the idea that it started off as an initial conversation and training about that, to sitting with the Secretary of State, New York State. And that conversation for me will always be incredible, because she really ignited that fire under us and was very clear on, do what matters to you, what's passionate to you, where you find your compassion, make that meet the journey that you're trying to make for yourself, right? And then it was just an incredible moment, not just in networking with the individuals that came on to speak with us and committed these sessions with us every week, but also what we cultivated as Harambe, big up Harambe 2021. Our cohort still is very much involved in each other's lives. We are very connected. Christina Arroyo, I hope you win. You deserve every political vote in your community. Like this is what we're about. And making sure that even for the alum that we're supporting them, and if not for that opportunity to be part of that cohort and part of that training and ongoing professional development for 6 months, I don't know that I would have still so much to say about being a leader of color in New York or anywhere.
And so I know you gave us a couple of highlights in there, of the program, but like, what would you say was the most impactful, right? If you go back to those sessions, if you go back to the experiences, with the fellow cohort members. What do you feel was the most impactful part of the program that you will always remember?
So the staff is extremely intentional, extremely intentional. There is no session that's just by chance or coincidence. Everything was so streamlined and connected to the previous or the latter. You didn't see it when it was happening, but you saw the connection later on. And I bring this up because I remember when Eli Nieves, who came in and told us her story as to why she went into the position that she went into as an attorney. This is somebody who were representing, I mean, from the Bronx, very similar background to me and many of us in the program. An attorney for, she represented or worked as counsel for Diddy's office, an entertainment company, and is now also a major counsel for one of the biggest healthcare industries in New York State. And all along, I kept thinking, you know, they're asking us to select a leadership coach that we so desire to work with. And I was so thinking in a very myopic way. Again, folks think, well, Soribel has a PhD. She has to know this. I'll be the first to say I am so naive when it comes to the human capital of things. I have never thought that because I was in education, I was under the opsis that I had to select somebody that also had a similar background to me, that whose focus was in education. And when I was paired with Ellie, of course, the curiosity in me asked why. Why didn't I get the person that I thought I matched with? And everybody knew but me. But when I had my sessions as after the program ended for us and we had to meet up with our leadership coaches, my sessions with Ellie, those 10 sessions till this day are probably one. I still have my notes. And it is the one journal that I go back to because the total nerd that I am, I tabulated each one with topics for each session. And I still utilize a lot of what she taught me in those sessions with my own clients now. And so Ellie also featured me in one of her projects. She has a podcast on women in awareness and in leadership. And that podcast attracted folks in South Africa who reached out to me to consult them in their programs. And I wouldn't have been able to have done that without Leaders of Color. Like for me, it's like, yeah, that's what this is about. And if that is what Leaders of Color represents, then I am on the right path.
Great. So let's talk about you, right? During your doctoral work and throughout early years in academia, you characterize yourself as a scholar focused on issues of diversity and collaboration in urban school leadership. Let us know, why this is so important to you.
Wow. So I focused on diversity without knowing I focused on diversity, right? And unfortunately, as much as DEI has become the trend that it is, it really has not been a trend for quite some time. I mean, the idea of DEI came up in 1976 with alongside when affirmative action started getting popular as well. And so it was really to make sure that we were checking boxes, but also to really teach folks about what they didn't have. And even now, it's not necessarily there quite yet, in my opinion. But the push for it is so apparent and so all over the place that you cannot help but to be a part of those conversations. And I bring this up because when I was a student in undergrad, I belonged to every Black organization possible. The Black Student Union, the Caribbean Student Union, the Latin America Student Union Association. I did not pledge, but I certainly was very involved on making sure that we would go up to New York State to lobby for funding, to get any and every support. And I think back, like, that was 1999. I was doing DEI work then, right? It wasn't called that. The terminologies weren't definitely attached to it, but I was doing that. And so working on my doctoral work, by no means was it an easy trajectory, but I always knew what my question was before I got into my program. I came from a background in nonprofit where I had, before attending my doc program, I had asked my CEO if it was possible for us to do some form of assessment so that when the evaluation came from the government asking us where the funding was being allocated, kind of to do a pre-audit before we got out of it. And she told me I didn't have the credentials.
Mm.
So I went and got a PhD, and then I recall them asking me to come back and see if I could finagle some time. And I said no, not because I didn't want to do it. It's just I really didn't have the time. But it was a full circle moment for me. Like, yeah, I knew what I was talking about. And so I was always very interested in how major corporations and government sectors and nonprofit organizations came together to truly assist the social mobility of Black and Brown kids in the school systems. I was always very interested in why the money just never really met the measure, or what was actually going on for us to really not make sense of it in districts across the US or globally. And I realized that, it got to the point where we're just a country and a system, especially in education, where we're resource rich and coordination poor. We continue to bring in, unfortunately, the wrong people in the right places and never give the students that deserve these opportunities the opportunity. And the assessments of those collaborations for me have always been key, because it's brought me now to a place where if I'm being invited to any table, or if I'm inviting folks to the table, we must have done our due diligence to figure out the why. Nepotism cannot be the reason. I would love to continue saying, well, if I got it, all my homies got it. Mm-hmm. But I want to make sure that all the homies are also aligned with the major mission and vision that we're trying to build here. And I've insisted on that. And I've been very persistent still in engaging in these certain communities that are very intentional about the betterment of not just education, but families and communities, and thinking about the policies in place and the narratives that have been written about us without us. Also thinking about how do we get away from this neoliberal impact of everybody wants to be famous for the one thing they've done. But when we ask them to sustain that hunger and that motivation, it kind of stays in that one realm. And instead of calling out the people that that probably are strong in those areas, gatekeeping that information. So I'm all about spreading this love. I'm all about whatever I learn, I want to share it with everyone, and bring in folks like me, people that look like me, as well as allies who can potentially be of service in our service, because our communities are still in dire need of assistance.
And I think it's amazing that we have the conversation about, not amazing, it's actually troubling that we have the conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and in so many, in this day and time, right? You just said that we're not there, right? We're not fully there, and it is now under attack, right? In other states, we're watching the banning or the attempt to ban DEI. So you later evolved into being grounded in social justice to promote solidarity and equitable practices in schools, communities, and society. As we just said, it's under attack in other states. What happens if we don't continue to approach this and meet it head on?
The oppression Olympics is going to continue. Instead of us coming together to really speak about, in a very candid, authentic, genuine way, to really speak about what exactly is, we're going to continue falling for the okie doke. And we're going to allow for white supremacists to build these bridges and wedges between our communities that are going to, at some point, continue to magnify and amplify. Well, we have 500 years of slavery that we have to talk about in our reparations. And then, we have these immigration policies and laws, and we have to reconsider how we view these populations. And then we have to also think about the Holocaust, right? Points in histories that all the while matter to respective populations differently. Not taking one from the other, but us having to be extremely intentional about coming together in solidarity, not necessarily putting our belief systems aside, but working together, be able to get exactly what is owed to each one of our respective groups, and to maximize everything we get to be able to do more with more. And even that is a controversial topic, right? Because not everybody does want to come hand in hand and want to feel that this kumbaya, which is also a very, touchy subject to even say. It's like Dr. Seuss, and speak on it from a very racial justice belonging term and ideology. But we really at some point need to unpack our individual issues, be very reflexive as to even how we're showing up for the collective, so that we can be a part of a conversation in unison that's going to be more about getting more about being there for one another, more about standing up and even supporting from your own state what happened in Tennessee in any way, whether it's a tweet or having a conversation with your community or educating somebody who has actually no idea that something like that is even happening and how that impacts us. That had such an impact on us, because it goes to show how, again, injustice our justice system is. Our Congress is still very much segregated and separated. That the fact that you can have one person get away with one thing and the same Black person in the same district cannot, right? It speaks highly as to what it is that we're still dealing with beyond injustices. It's education. Right. And as an educator, it's not lost on me that without us as educators, where would everybody else be? But I'm then forced to think, who are we preparing to teach these matters? And why are these teachers also allowed to be so biased and so subjective in their curricula? Why don't we start auditing our international curricula so that we're all leaning into teaching the same thing at the same time? So I always joke about how Common Core back in 2012, with all of its good intent and because of its poor rollout, lost its true definition of the purpose that it was about, to what it was supposed to be. And when I explain it in most layman terms to parents, what Common Core was, it was really going back to Lyndon B. Johnson's intent to tell, well, Sputnik happened. It goes to show that Russia's students are much more ahead than ours. What can we do to elevate and increase the motivation of how we're teaching our students? What can we do? And it went from Lyndon B. Johnson's idea in 1969, and it took President Barack Obama, to put it into place. And because it wasn't rolled out in a way that everybody understood it, it got a lot of flack. So yeah, it's one of those very going back full circle to who's teaching who and why. How are we preparing our teachers to teach these injustices, whether they know or not? And then a lot of it is your own values that you're taught, right? Racism is a social construct that's taught at home or in your community. And if you're not careful, you become a sponge, right? And that sponge is going to soak in all of that information that is really reliant on histories of misinformation, and then leading to being miseducated. Lauryn Hill. So I am very clear on how we move the ways that we teach, but it's not easy when we still have to follow these national policies that are still in place.
That are still in place and have a white supremacist ways attached to them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't built for us.
No,
Amongst all the things that you are author. Can you tell us about the book you co-authored, Rebuilding by Multilingual Leaders for Socially Just Communities?
oh my goodness, that was such a passion. That I must say I'm not good with bragging about that, but I should do more. I should do more bragging about that, because that was truly that was passion, right? So New York City went through a very very different time during the Bloomberg era, right? After he finally decided to step down, he brings in Kathy Black, someone whose entire career has been around mass communications, had no idea how to even be a part of a school district of such, like, the atrocity of the numbers of school districts within New York City, right? It's just uncanny. And during that time, this is 2012, New York City was also not prepared for the new languages that were coming in. And which is beautiful, right? That's what New York City is about, like people, languages. That's truly the diversity, but we're still very segregated in our communities. And that's it's on purpose. It's part of the system. The Chinese dialects, Cantonese, Mandarin, were no longer, as well as Spanish, were no longer the most languages that needed interpreters. It was Urdu, Farsi, and Haitian Creole. Communities were booming with these populations, but our education system was not set up to assist those families, those communities. Kathy Black had no idea what she was doing, and we realized this is a great time to get support from the state to assist us in rebuilding and recalibrating our education leadership programs, so that when there were teachers that were interested in being part of these communities and leading these communities, we knew that they had to get their certificates as school building leader and school district leader if they so chose to. And so I had a conversation with, at the time, one of the assistant commissioners of New York State's Department of Education, and she supported Queens College in the most incredible way. She was very supportive in giving us financial capital, but also gave us the leverage to say, you select the students you want to prepare. So I had carte blanche to go into all these school districts and say, I want that teacher. I want that teacher. I want that teacher to lead this community over in Flushing that the parents don't even understand what the teachers are saying. But I want somebody that's going to be intentional about creating a space and place for families to come to the school for anything, right? Create the school as a social hub, that whole old school Joy Dreyfus community school district building that's going to bring in families, whether it's for a health concern, an education concern, a housing concern. Let it all live there. And these teachers wanted to lead that. All of them said, I'm ready. I just need the credential. So I recruited 20 students. These 20 students stuck by me the entire 2.5 years after I said, hey, this is the first year of this program. We're going to work through this together. You may have to pay for your tuition and wait for reimbursement. All of the bureaucracy, they dealt with it on, like, just believing in me in a way that was, to this day, I'm still in touch with them because they never complained. They never said, oh, you promised, why do I have to pay? It was like, yeah, whatever you need, we're going to be there. there was there then due diligence to recruit students after them that they thought would fit the program. So every year it's been that first cohort I selected, the second, third, and fourth have been selected by the students prior.
Mhm.
Now, those first 2 years, I also got a call from the editor and said, hey, we're looking for something new, something with the work that you've been doing around bilingual and multilingual communities. What do you have? I said, well, I will write this book, but I'm not writing without my students.
Wow.
So I asked for their permission. I said, if I put this proposal together, do I have your okay to move it on with your names attached, with your subject that you're interested in? And each one of them wrote a chapter, right? And it was their real experience on how they were planning to make a change based on what they learned in the program, what they were already doing, and the intentions after graduation. So that really stemmed from me recognizing in 2012 that this was not working. New York City Department of Education did not have anybody with an education background until Carmen Farina, 2 years later. She was the only chancellor that did not need a waiver. Everybody else before that did. We
In
had
are you talking about in history?
a
Or
very short amount of time, right? We had, think about like back in the 80s and 90s, we had Anthony Alvarado, we had Rudy Crew. Fast forward, we have had other folks that have somewhat of an educational background, not because they taught or understand the school system, but their kids probably went to New York City public school systems, right? And public schools. But we had, Joel Klein, who was an attorney, right? We had to deal with Walcock as well, who was also an attorney or an economist. And it just kept repeating. Those cycles were very repetitive. And after Carmen Farina, we also had folks who no longer needed the waivers, but it took that long for New York City. And because of, again, the leadership in place and the policies in place to allow for that to happen, why were you able to give waivers to folks who did not have an education background? And it's not, New York City is not the only person, right? For a long time, I know that the commissioner for the Administrative of Children's Services was also somebody who used to run a firehouse. Like we have a lot of this going on, right? It's who you know.
we have a lot of this going on, and then we wonder why some of these systems don't perform at their best.
Absolutely, absolutely. And goes back to why I was saying, I've been fortunate to have been asked to sit at these tables and look at the collaborative assessments so that when the evaluation is made and done, we don't have to pivot because of something we don't know. Oh, we know why we messed up because we had the wrong person in this right conversation.
Right. So you currently serve as a member with educational leadership at City University of New York, Queens College. You're a bilingual researcher and a consultant that uses both quantitative and qualitative methods to drive initiatives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are some of the initiatives you can point to, and what are some of the signs people should look out for when ensuring their higher education, private, and nonprofit sectors are being inclusive?
Yeah, so in my roles, I'm very, even in one of the workshops that I've recently conducted, it was about name your superpower, right? Name that one thing that you're good at, not just because somebody else told you, but strip every other layer of what makes you from an intersectional lens, and what is that? And I think when I have to answer that myself, it's truly making or allowing folks to feel comfortable in my presence or not, but as long as I'm part of that, to say what it is, to call a thing a thing. And I bring that up because we are taught to speak in these very nuanced words, right? For a while, they were just like, oh, we have to move the needle. There is no needle to move. What needle are we moving? Explain to me. Did you find the needle, right? Or understanding these ideas of paraphrasing these issues that are so rooted and grounded in, again, systemic misunderstandings. And when I've conducted research and I've done intakes, and even in my courses with my students, the first things that I tend to really lean in on is, who are you? Why are you here? How do you see yourself being included in these conversations? And taking the time, not just to get to know them as part of the school, the organization, whether it even is with my colleagues, right? Faculty, anybody that has a PhD behind their name, they are hot sedity for days, right? And even with my own colleagues, I have to remind them, take those letters off. You're still a human being. At the end of the day, you're still the same person that you're actually teaching. You just know a little bit more than they do because you've either focused on it more. But these are folks that are going to be our colleagues one day, right? So we have to respect their time in wanting to know what we can deliver. And when I provide them with the methods and the structures of researching both qualitative and quantitative, our numbers when it comes to inclusion, diversity, equity, access, justice, belonging, culture, our numbers can say whatever we want them to say. You can even say, hey, our executive team, we now have 50% women. Well, of course you have 50% women if you only have one man on the other side and you hired one woman, but is that still reflective of the entire organization, right? And can you support that with actual statements that are demonstrating that what you're planning to do to increase these numbers based on representation? What is it along the way that you're doing to not just be intentional, or are you just saying that and letting it sit there to continue using that narrative of, no, we're on the right track and here's why. So I've been very clear with not just my university, and I love City University of New York, but I'm also with the organizations that I consult with. It's, are we really looking at the issue, or are we looking to create an issue because we don't want to be caught? We don't want to be called out. We don't want to be the ones to show up that are not doing it. Yeah, again, you have 50% of your CEO is women because you have one man in office and one woman in office. So of course, but what is it that you're doing to make sure that your directors, your middle managers, your frontline workers are also reflective of this process? Or do they all look like you? And if they all do look like you, then what are you doing so that doesn't continue to persist or insist? And it's not lost on me also that in our Black and Brown community, we have to do better.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do better with not trying and wanting to be the only one. We have to do better with competing with one another. There is enough for everybody. There is an abundance for everybody. And it really hurts my soul when I see that folks are too caught up in who they think they are, that they forget to extend their hand to lift somebody else up that looks just like them. May not necessarily want to be like them, but may need that one introduction to guide them to probably go on the path that they are not even sure if they belong in yet. So I think in my role, as I think about DEI, we have so much work to do. We have so much work to do. But that's also in a very positive way. Because imagine we didn't and we were there already. and we had other things to take care of probably. But the fact that we are now speaking about this so openly, and it's becoming one of the most engaging topics, and very uncomfortable, right? Because you cannot walk into white rooms and say race without them saying, oh my goodness, I'm fragile, I'm being attacked. Or walking into rooms with majority white women without thinking, wait a minute, you're telling me you understand, you're telling me you're listening, you're telling me you get it, but I know you're still going to listen to the white man, because everything I just said is probably going to be completely erased because you're still much more comfortable listening to a white man. And again, those things are not lost on me or many of us. So there's still a lot of work to do. I'm hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful. There's nothing better than, being in a room where one or two people walk out and say they now are ready to become change agents. That's amazing. That's amazing. The power of coming together, it speaks volumes, especially under the umbrella of the world that we're living in right now.
There you have it, people. Dr. Soribel Genao, Leaders of Color class of 2021. As always, you can check us out on leadersofcolor.net and all of our social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Don't be mad at me, Doctor. I usually warn you before we start, but just always ask that our guest leave us with the last word.
Yeah, I won't be mad at you. Now, leaders of color have been, and I'm not just saying New York, I think nationally we represent an organization that was set out to do major things, and y'all have done an incredible amount for us. It is something that has allowed me to create more footprints than I wanted to, or thought I would. I strongly encourage those who are interested in being part of Leaders of Color, no matter where. If you are up for it, it is a huge task and a huge commitment, a huge responsibility, but it's one that comes with so many more rewards, whether you're aware of them or not immediately. It's a network of people, right? People are priceless, and we have been able and fortunate, this is not luck or by chance, to get together and meet and be spoken to and with knowledge and skills and dispositions that we probably would never have had the opportunity had it not been for this program. So thank you all for listening.
There you have it. Thank you.
Welcome.